They shoved splinters of saints' bones between a woman's teeth mid-contraction. Certain heaven worked faster than infection, but that was just the opening act. Midwives closed the shutters, draped the bed in dark cloth, and muttered charms declaring, "As knots tighten, so the womb loosens." With no surgeon on standby, the entire neighborhood prayed aloud that Eve's ancient curse would run its course quickly. Holy water fizzed over glowing iron tongs lying in the hearth, not for cauterizing but for scaring away demons who supposedly hid in vaginal blood. Candles made from church wax flickered, dripping onto floor straw meant to soak the mess. And if a dog wandered in, they called it lucky, because dogs sensed death before priests did. One woman in York swore she saw St. Margaret herself strolling past the door. Everyone cheered, assuming the saint's cameo counted as anesthesia. Of course it didn't. She ruptured anyway, and the baby arrived purple yet breathing, crowned with candle soot and superstition. The medical consensus on pain relief was grimly simple. God said, "Scream." Learned clergy cited Genesis, so scholars debated theology while women doubled over. Physicians, who had never attended a live birth, recommended moderate suffering to purge sin, then promptly wrote prescriptions for male kidney stones that included opium. Women. They got cumin tea. If a wealthy household dared defy doctrine, servants ground poppy heads into warm ale, administering it in secret while whispering that the draught was merely cheering cordial. The midwife could lose her livelihood and her hands if anyone reported unnatural silence during labor. Picture it. Your epidural depends on everyone pretending it doesn't exist. Yes, you read that correctly. Meanwhile, village boys wagered whether the church bell would toll for a baptism or a funeral. Coin flips felt more scientific than the period's obstetrics textbooks, most of which still quoted Aristotle's claim that female bodies were inverted ovens. When the shrieks peaked, attendants hurled every folk remedy they knew. Goose fat warmed in a pewter spoon to grease the birth canal, powdered dog dung sprinkled as a cleanser, and crushed emeralds, if you could afford them, served as talismans against womb-biting spirits. Some households dangled iron keys over the mother's head, arguing that iron repelled fairies who liked swapping infants for changelings. Others stuffed lavender under pillows so the room smelled vaguely less like terror. Ropes knotted above the bed became medieval handrails. Women yanked them so hard the beams creaked, which supposedly pulled pain out through the arms. Because of course they did. Outside, husbands loitered, drafting remarriage contracts just in case the blood-curdling chorus stopped abruptly. No one questioned their pragmatism. Death in childbirth hovered between 30 and 40% in certain plague-addled decades. Romance novels forget to mention that statistic. If the mother collapsed before the child emerged, the protocol turned macabre. Surgeons, usually barbers, moonlighting with bone saws, were summoned not to save the baby, but to save its soul. Canon law demanded emergency cesarean baptism within minutes, so blades met flesh on kitchen tables slick with lard. Survival odds for mother or infant were laughably low, yet parish records praise the pious zeal of men who sliced cadavers in candlelight. One chronicler noted a baby, removed like a chick from an eggshell, baptized, and expired before cockcrow. Still, families thanked God, convinced that a momentary gulp of sanctified water outweighed an unbaptized eternity. Modern NICUs measure oxygen saturation. Medieval Europe measured grace by droplets. It gets weirder. If the corpse weighed more than expected, neighbors speculated about twins still trapped inside, prompting grisly second incisions for thoroughness. Efficiency, medieval style. For mothers who survived, the birthing stool awaited, a three-legged wooden throne with a strategic hole that turned gravity into midwife. Picture a squat rack minus the gym towels, plus relentless contractions. The stool's front legs were shorter, forcing a forward lean so attendants could massage the lower back with warm oil concocted from bear fat and mint. Not for comfort, mint supposedly scared away witches jealous of fertility. Midwives wore aprons stitched with tiny lead crosses, the period's version of protective gear. If labor stalled, they blew powdered ivy through a reed into the woman's nostrils, betting sneezes might shove things along. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it ruptured membranes at the wrong angle, flooding the stool in an instant tidal wave. But hey, at least nobody blamed the furniture. Alcohol starred as the household anesthetic. Heated beer, honeyed wine, or birthing caudle. Ale simmered with eggs, sugar, and nutmeg flowed freely. The idea was to blur the edges of agony, though in practice it made everyone tipsy and clumsy. Midwives had to choose. Keep the mother conscious enough to push or risk drowning her reflexes in grog. Accounts from Lübeck describe women alternately laughing and sobbing while gripping their cups, the foam mingling with sweat on their lips. One scribe quipped that caudle made labor a tavern in hell. Doctors frowned at drunken mothers, but applauded drunken fathers. They called it stomach fortification against distressing noise. Yes, medieval patriarchy came with a chaser. Superstition did double duty as pharmacology. Birthing girdles, long parchment ribbons inscribed with prayers, were wrapped around swollen bellies like proto-yoga belts. Some were dipped in the blood of martyrs for extra potency. Occasionally, a monk would loan out a relic, a finger bone, a fragment of the true cross, to rest on the woman's abdomen. One Parisian abbey rented such relics by the hour, charging more at night when contractions usually intensified. Supply and demand, medieval edition. Lest you think everyone was gullible, records reveal at least one midwife prosecuted for using forged relics carved from sheep bone. Fraud still hurt less than labor. Midwives themselves walked a perilous line between healer and heretic. They memorized secret herbs, savory to speed contractions, clary sage to ease after pains, but revealing recipes risked accusations of witchcraft. So knowledge passed orally, generation to generation, like clandestine code. Authorities forced some to swear oaths promising they would neither perform abortions nor speak of unnatural births, lest panic spread. Failure meant inquisitorial courts, where testimony from a single disgruntled husband could end in flames. Imagine delivering 30 babies in one winter, then standing trial because one came out with an extra digit. The phrase burnout takes on murderous clarity. Post-delivery rituals piled on. The cord was tied with red wool, color of life, and buried under the hearthstone so no enemy could hex the child. The placenta, considered both holy and hazardous, might be fed to dogs, burned, or pickled in vinegar for medical salves. Women entered a month-long confinement called lying in, sealed indoors behind drawn curtains to guard against evil wind entering still-open pores. Friends delivered chicken broth, gossip, and more relics for the nursery. Day 40 marked churching, where mothers purified themselves with holy water before rejoining society. Translation: you were impure until proven otherwise, though nobody purified the men who'd spent the month drinking. Throughout it all, statistics whispered dread. In 13th century London, burial registers list nearly equal coffins for mothers and newborns. Some parishes developed separate cemeteries for women delivered of sorrow. The bleak math inspired bizarre insurance schemes. Wealthy merchants paid nuns to pray 24-hour vigils during their wives' labors, essentially outsourcing divine intervention. Meanwhile, poorer families named infants after the day's saint, hoping fast branding would secure heavenly attention. Saint Day naming was medieval tagging. You tagged your deity so they couldn't ignore the notification. Yet resilience thrived amid the terror. Women formed gossip guilds, informal unions that defended midwives against legal threats and pooled money for burial costs if things went wrong. These networks circulated pamphlets, hand-copied of course, detailing which herbs actually dulled pain and which merely tasted foul. One English recipe mixed henbane, vinegar, and crushed pearls. Side effects included hallucinations of dancing geese, but some mothers swore it shortened labor by hours. Talk about trade-offs. Even the Renaissance barely dented the agony. Male physicians barged into birthing rooms, armed with forceps they barely understood, sometimes dislocating tiny skulls while bragging about heroic extraction. Women still clutched relics, they just bled under better-lit ceilings. Pain relief awaited the 18th century discovery of ether, condemned at first by clergy quoting the same Genesis curse. Apparently, Paradise Lost had a long shelf life. Survival, however, bred stories. Midwives recorded triumphs, twins born alive during a thunderstorm, a mother who sang through contractions thanks to poppy ale, a breech baby turned manually while St. Margaret's relic warmed on the hearth. Each victory traveled by word of mouth, stitched into the collective memory, a patchwork quilt of pain, courage, and occasional ghost sightings. Modern maternity wards hum with monitors. Medieval birth chambers hummed with psalms, profanity, and the rattle of rosary beads hitting wooden stools. Swap beeping machines for flickering tallow candles, and the soundtrack changes, not the stakes. By the time Europe staggered into the early modern period, maternal mortality finally dipped, slowly, unevenly, but enough to weaken the old theology of mandatory suffering. Yet echoes remain. Every time someone jokes that labor feels like being cursed, they're quoting a millennium of doctrine. They just don't know it. Medieval women certainly did. They screamed the syllabus while clawing at rope knots, and when the baby finally wailed, alive, slippery, borderline miraculous, midwives exhaled the same collective sigh still heard today in delivery rooms worldwide. Relief that life, against all ridiculous odds, had pulled off another narrow victory.